Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Agasicles and Steven from GearWorks.com and the E2KG Network podcasting channel here on YouTube, here with episode number 6 of What's Your Issue, the People's Weekly Comic Book Podcast. Here with me, as always, is my co-host, Mr. Steven Lohr. How are you doing, Steven?
Doing good.
Good. So we are gathered here tonight to do what we always do, which is every week we run down 6 of the comics that we pulled from our stack last week and do an on-air review in pretty excruciating detail. Then we each go on to pick the best thing that we read this week and talk about those books a little bit if they are different than any of the books that we went through in the review rundown. Then we move on and call out any honorable mentions that there were in the preceding shipping week, and then we round out the show by letting you know what our pull list is for the upcoming week so that you know what to expect next episode. Tonight, we are here to talk about the books that shipped the shipping week of 7 November 2018. But before we get started with that, well, first let me mention, this is a spoilery review show. We will hold nothing back unless we choose to do so of our own accord. So if you haven't read the books, just go read the books. It's Monday night, New Comic Book Day is on Wednesday. You should be done already. Before we move on to the review segment, which heads off the top of our show, let's talk a little bit about the passing of Stan Lee. Steven and I kind of kicked it around a little bit today. It was a bit of a struggle to come to a decision on whether or not we were going to do the show at all. And I asked whether or not maybe the more appropriate thing to do was to maybe just be silent for the night. At the end of the day, I think what we both came around to was, and I didn't know Stan Lee personally, I never met him at a Comic-Con or anything, but observing what I did know about him, I figured that maybe the best way to honor him would be to press on with the show. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about comic books, and we're going to talk about the creators who work on those comic books that we love. Steven, did you want to say anything else about Mr. Lee before we move on to the review segment?
I just, in a very, my head is not really that straight in that moment, but yeah, he was a great man to honor, and I don't know, I'm glad that he is able to live on in our spirits. That's all I can say.
Okay. And so we're I'm a little cantilever tonight with a difference in the sequence of the show, so I'm trying to get out the social media very quickly. But at the top of our review segment is Justice League number 11. I also didn't get a chance to prep, well, I did get a chance to prep notes. I just have them in a different place than I normally do. So I'll have my notes up very shortly about Justice League number 11. Yes, so Justice League number 11. Subtitled Drowned Earth Part 2, written by Scott Snyder, with colors by, with overall art by Francis Manapul. I was very glad to see Manapul back on this issue. Again, I know him most recently from from a few issues that he did of Detective Comics, I think during the New 52, and he wasn't on as a full-time artist. He would kind of drop in and do an issue here or there. I don't know that I've seen him on a long-term, ongoing of single issues for a lengthy period of time, so I was very concerned that he was just being brought in to do an issue or two of the special. So I'm glad to see that he's at least on to continue the story. Letters by Tom Napolitano. So the situation is following on the heels of, quite frankly, a bunch of books. So I won't go into the whole list because there's a ton of books. If you haven't been tracking Drowned Earth, then I'm sure that there's a checklist out there somewhere. I'm not going to go through that on this show. But we move on to the next chapter of the tale of Poseidon's disappearance, driving Aquaman and Diana to have sought him out, and then they go on to look for one of their ancient ancestors and secret weapons and lost knowledge of Atlantis. You get the drift. The Ocean Lords have been holding a grudge for what must have been a millennia, and now they're ready to give mankind their comeuppance, and Arthur appears to be the one that they mean to make an example out of. And on their way to doing that, they strip him of his aquapathic powers. Diana swings in to rescue him from walking the plank, which is how this issue opens. And then Mara tags up with Superman and the Flash to seek out a weapon that will balance the odds. On art on this, like I said, I can't say enough how pleased I was to see Manapul back for a second issue. Whatever his deal turns out to be on doing Justice League, his artwork is just simply amazing. I don't feel like this issue was quite as sharp as last issue, and I'm kind of, like I said, I'm observing, and it seems like when he was doing those drop-in issues on Detective, his artwork was a lot more detailed. But it's fine, right? Look, most artists who are highly detailed artists, other than Jim Lee, right, who can't put together a string of an ongoing issues because the work that they do is too meticulous. If Manapul can shift his style and pivot just slightly, and that's what allows him to do a bunch of issues in a row, I'm completely fine with that. And again, this issue seemed a skosh bit less than last. Not that there was anything wrong. There were just a few things that didn't quite come off as spectacularly as the last issue. And I'm making some assumptions about his managing his workflow. It could have been that these issues were written 6 months to a year ago, so who knows. As great a penciler as Manapul is, what really stands out here to me is the coloring work that he's doing. Everything's backdrop, especially, is exquisitely crafted and given a veneer of its own. His oceans are filled with life and color, and yet he draws desert scenes just as great. He has a few pages of pretty unique panel arrangements, which always helps keep the comic moving and not feeling so samey from one page to the next. On story, Snyder's really crafted quite a bit of a masterpiece on this issue. He lets Arthur get his gumption up when the Ocean Lords tell him to walk the plank. You get about 10 seconds of thinking, oh, here it goes, he's about to turn the tide, he's going to do it. And then one of the Ocean Lords kind of snuffs that out by, just blocking his offensive and tossing him into the pit, rendering his grand, when he was doing it, you could kind of hear the superhero music playing in the background, right? And then all of a sudden it comes to a screeching halt, and he's tossed to the pit. And then you get Wonder Woman to swoop in and rescue him. And so we're back up on Thrills and Chills again. So in the span of 7 to 10 panels, you get this real big roller coaster of emotion, and it was really effective. What I love here is Snyder's use, like I said, of the drum beat. You get a big clash of cymbals, and then a few pages of snare riff, and then you get a big cymbal crash again, meaning there are several high points in this issue, and it's only a 22-page book, but it's really impressive. It's wonderfully paced and doled out in slices as if it's a chef creating a fine dish. This whole thing is building up to a nice crescendo, and it's not even the finale yet. I could easily read 3 more issues of this, which is not what I would normally say about an event. Most events, I'm just like, all right, let's just go ahead and we know what's going to happen. Let's just go ahead and get it done with. So I will admit of the one thing that's dragging me down in it, though, is the Legion of Doom. I feel like we've done 10 issues with them.
Yeah.
They keep turning up like a bad penny, and I'm like, look, Luther, either get your ish together, right, or just get out of the book for a few arcs, right? You've had your opportunity. You've had your chance at bat. So overall, I scored this issue an 8.5 out of 10. If you've been reading along with the storyline from the beginning, this issue is a great payoff, and it's still not even the finale, as I mentioned. Snyder's making excellent use of the Justice League itself, not featuring any one member so much that we kind of get bored of seeing them. But he's also including lesser-known League members who, we yearn for. We want to see story, every time one of them makes a cameo, you're like, oh man, wouldn't it be cool to get 2 or 3 issues of Adam Strange? But Snyder's giving you just enough of them, but then kind of holding them back. So it's good. Making delayed gratification. A lot of the things that I criticized in the special issue, the Justice League Aquaman Drowned Earth #1, as far as leaving them unaddressed, and in The Win, which is when Tom King was writing, and maybe some of that was deliberate. This issue kind of ties some of those knots together. It's more of a good thing and even better than most of the issues that I read in the opening arc of the Justice League. So, Steven, did you get a chance to read this?
Yeah, I did get to read it. I would give it a 7.5 because I didn't enjoy it as much as the other issues because I think it was a lot to consume for myself.
Okay, all right. I could definitely see that.
And I'm not sure I'm gonna be excited to see Legion of Doom because I don't like the way Scott Snyder writes them.
Yeah, I can understand that too. There's a thing. I'm sorry, go
I
ahead now.
can't see Lex working with Joker. It doesn't fit right to me, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I guess, I don't know. I guess maybe I'm more accepting of that because that's been done before.
Yes, it's been done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, right, but you're right. I mean, if you look at it at face value, the whole concept of the Legion of Doom, right, which I guess is the shtick, right? And it's going to be interesting to see how Snyder ties it off. The whole problem with the Legion of Doom is that the notion itself is destined to failure because no group of villains that evil are ever going to work together long enough to actually
Yeah,
defeat.
it never really fit to me.
Right.
I've seen it happen since Super Friends, and I'm not really a big fan of Super Friends,
Right.
but it just, I don't know. I never see Lex Luthor work well with the Joker,
Yeah.
and it doesn't. You end up seeing him betray again. It's like, what the hell's the point?
Yeah, but what it creates is I guess what it does more than anything is it's a maneuver play where it creates one-off pairings that are spectacular and can be special when you like Hawk Girl and Joker, right? Like that fight, her getting her feet back under her and taking out the Joker in that initial 10-story spread. Lex and Batman, which you normally wouldn't get because Lex isn't a Batman villain. And then Lex like breaking all the bones in Batman's body. I mean, so you get, like I said, you get some neat set pieces that you wouldn't normally get. And I guess maybe that's the only reason, to put them together. I don't know, man. Talk to me about Death of the Inhumans, #5. This is interesting because I'm currently binge watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which I ignored for years, and of course the Inhumans
Wow.
storyline is strong in that. So talk to me about Death of the Inhumans.
All right. The Death of Inhumans, #5, is by Donny Cates, and is a writer, and the artist is Ariel Overlet. Yeah. Or Overvetti. I don't know how to actually say it. But yeah. It's this is the final issue of this miniseries, and it's closing the chapter of the Kree creating this, making Maximus into this Inhuman hunter monster creation. Like it's very, like, I guess I could say horrific. It's very horror like type of story, and he's he he it makes it seem like he killed the Inhumans, but he actually didn't. That's what Vox misled them Inhumans to thinking, because the only people that are alive is the royal family, and they find out that Vox has actually been taking the Inhumans and making them into just like a monster creation of themselves. Like all the Inhumans were not themselves anymore, and in the towards the end of the issue, Black Bolt had to kill all of his, some of his people, not all of them, just some of his people that were captured by the Vox, and that it was pretty heartbreaking to actually see that happening in the book. And I actually enjoyed seeing that. That's what made me enjoy this series a lot, because you see Black Bolt actually cares about his people, and to see his people ripped away from him is kind of heartbreaking. And it was a really good book. I was, because I really don't like Donny Cates as a writer. I'm not really at all into the hype that he gets. I'm kind of indifferent with that, but I honestly think this is the best book he's written. And the only thing I did not like was the cop out with Lockjaw, because they showed like he dies, but he doesn't. So I was kind of disappointed with that, but the book was pretty good, and I do love the way Black Bolt is written in this series, because he's actually speaking in sign language, which I rarely see done with Black Bolt in comic books. They always try to find ways to get around the sign language, and it gets really annoying to me. And I'm glad that Donny Cates and Ariel already was able to illustrate that into the book. They did a really great job of demonstrating sign language, and they didn't escape around it. I really like how he writes it. That's about it.
So let me ask you. You mentioned that you don't care for Donny Cates that much, but this issue, and I think you've talked about a few of these issues on the show. You've liked each of the last few ones. So is this an inflection point? Are you becoming a believer?
Oh no, I'm not sure I'm becoming a believer. I mean, I don't know. I'm in the firm believer that every writer has a chance of writing a good book. For me,
right from issue to issue, right?
I don't think there's ever a such thing as I don't think there's ever such thing as a bad writer per se, because I think every person is able to write something good and something bad. There's been writers that I have loved that's written terrible books before, so
right.
I can see this happening. So
okay,
yeah, that's about it.
So I mean, I know that you have favorite writers, so.
Yes, I do have favorite writers. I do.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll come back to that on another day.
All right.
So let's talk about The Dreaming #3. What publisher is this from?
Oh, that's from Vertigo.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
It's from the Sandman universe.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's by The Dreaming is by Simon Spurrier whereas I noticed, and the artist is Bleakwest Evely. So yeah, this issue is pretty interesting. It kicks off with, it gives a introduction of Judge Gallows, which is, a figment of imagination. Like he's of what humanity has become. Like I think I'm not really too sure about it, but it looks like maybe someone has imagined him into the dreaming world, and that's how his origin story began. Yeah, he finds out that Sandman is no longer around, and Lucien and the others, the other people that are in this Sandman world are unable to organize things without Morpheus. They're sort of struggling, and they don't know what to do, and Judge Gallows ends up taking over the reins of of trying to be in charge of the world of Morpheus. That's what the issue is mainly about. And I did really enjoy this issue. I forgot to give a score for Death and Inhumans. I would give that 9.5. But for The Dreaming, I would give this a 8.5, because I really did like the way they introduced Judge Gallows. I really didn't know his character, and I did get to know a lot about him in here, and that was a good way of introducing that. Oh, your mic is still muted.
Okay, yeah, I guess it's got a double mute thing when I swing the swing arm up. So, are you reading all of these Sandman books from Vertigo?
I am.
Okay.
I'm not really too familiar with Sandman.
Neither am I. Like, when I, writing that, so I wrote a review for issue #1, I guess before we started doing the podcast. Maybe that was the last round of reviews that I wrote before we actually started doing this podcast. And, it was tough because you had to make some leaps of faith in making some assumptions about what was going on. It's a very complex universe, even though there haven't been a ton of comics written about it. So,
Yeah.
So so what is that doing to your pull? I mean, how frequently are those coming out? Because there's like 5 books, right? So they got to be coming out like one every week.
I think so.
Okay.
I don't really keep track of what. I just look at the websites.
From week to week.
Comicsology. I don't really keep up to how weekly these things are coming.
Right. No, but I mean, assuming that they're all shipping monthly, I'm just saying with 5 books, I reckon Vertigo is spreading them out. So as far as its impact on your reading time, I mean, there's one of these books, because this is a plus up from whatever your recurring pull list was before, right? So that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I mean,
you expecting to enjoy it. That's why, but I actually did enjoy it.
Okay. Yeah, right. No, I was the same way as number 1. And when the week that I read it, for me, it was I was doing the best thing I read this week back then, and it was the best thing that I read that week. I was absolutely floored by that issue. I was amazed, and like you, I just figured walking into it that the world had been pre-built and was so intricate that there's no way I was going to be able to onboard with it like the first issue. But if I'd had. Yeah, I mean, I elected not to dive in, full bore and adopt all of these onto my reading list because at the time my reading list was just full. But no, that's cool. That's cool. And it's got to be awesome to because they're all interconnected and they have characters that flip back and forth across the issue. So that's got to be rewarding, right? It is a shared universe. So.
Yeah, I noticed the books are really tying into each other.
Okay.
And they all going through the same story, so it's like you are you're like forced into picking up all the books. They all centered around what's going on. The only book that felt out of place was Lucifer. That's it.
Okay.
I noticed.
Okay.
But yeah, I've only started reading Sandman recently. I read volume 1 and 2 it was a couple of weeks ago I did read it.
Okay.
It was for my comic book club that I go to. And I had to read those 2. So I'm getting somewhat familiar with the Sandman universe. And I was able to enjoy this book much better because now I'm actually getting a piece of the puzzle.
Right.
But yeah.
Right.
It was interesting to see how it started out.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that a little later again of what is, when you're on a book and you're reading it and you enjoy it, but every comic book reader, everybody who does it for a long period of time, they have their notions of this is my Batman or this is my Aquaman or whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes the problem with that though is for the longest time I never had a Joker because I didn't read a Joker origin never came across, right? And no writer that I was with during their run was a big Joker expert, right? So sometimes you miss out on those things. The people who did, and I forget who wrote it now, but the people who onboarded with Aquaman when they did the story where he lost his arm and had the trident for the arm, those people are ardent, fervent Aquaman fans, and that's their Aquaman. But you had to be in comics at that time, right, in history when it went down. So, just for my generation, there are people who their Batman is the Frank Miller Batman, right? Because we were kids when that thing dropped, and that's what you read. So that kind of stuff is always interesting, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But the other thing I was going to say is, then there's also this notion of you're reading the book and you like it, but you don't hit that point until that thing has been out on the market for a year sometimes, right? That masterwork payoff of them all being woven together, you don't start getting that until maybe you've been on it a year, so. So yeah, so let's wrap up with your. I guess this is your last review. Runaways number 15.
All right, Runaways 15 is written by Rainbow Rowell, and the artist is Chris Anka. I really did enjoy this book. This book is it's about Nico finding out her staff of one is an actual living being. She actually finds out that it's actually a human inside that staff that she possesses, and she gets to know the staff a little bit, and it's pretty interesting. It was an interesting take to find out that the staff of one is actually a living person, and he was held captive by Nico's grandmother. We get to know about her ancestry past. It's kind of interesting, and I did like it. And I wish I was able to find out a little bit more, but I think they gave us enough for us to be intrigued by it. And I'm glad that Chris Anko was back into this book, because he took a 2-issue break. I noticed when I was reading the issues, and the series was a little different without him. I didn't like the previous artist that much, and I'm glad that he's actually back into the series, and I was able to enjoy it much better with him drawing it. So yeah, and I give this issue a 8.0. It was a really good issue. I really did like Nico finding out about the staff as a living person. It's an interesting take. And she does point it out as like a genie, and I think is kind of interesting.
Well, that's good, because I was going to ask if it was more like a Ghost Rider deal. So it's good to hear that it's a genie.
Yeah, because that's what he's like. He's like a genie that grants wishes.
Okay.
With the magic staff, but yeah, he only could do the spell once.
Right.
He said she complained about that to him, and it's like that's what her grandmother put upon him.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Very cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Spider-Geddon number 3, and unfortunately, like I said, I didn't get a chance to write a mini review about this and take copious notes. I'm going to be going right from the book. I'm going to be looking at the book as I'm talking through it. So this is based on a story by Dan Slott, a story by Christos Gage. Pencilers on it were Carlo Barberi and Todd Nauck. Inkers on it were Jose Marzan Jr. and Todd Nauck as well. And the colorist was David Curell. Letters by Travis Lanham. Now, if you recall, I wasn't a super huge fan of Spider-Geddon number 2. I was left very confused about, what we were doing. I also made mention of the fact that I didn't particularly care for the way they drew Miles in this issue. And I'd have to look back. I didn't check to see if this is the same artist on 3 as it was on 2. I have a feeling that it's not, and I am going to check real quick since I have it right here at my fingertips. Yeah, so the last art team was Jorge Molina and Jay Leister. So it's a completely different art team, it seems like, on this, which is interesting, and maybe they just had to spread the issues around. But I liked this one a lot better, partially because of the art. There's a lot, there's a lot more contrast in the colors. Again, I talk about, the fact that, Dave Curiel is on colors, and we've talked about something recently where his name came up as well. But he does a lot of great color contrast here. Carlo Barberi and Ted Nauck, again, I don't know who did what pages, but the one thing I wasn't super crazy for is the Takuya Yamashiro, so the Spider-Man of Earth 51778. I didn't feel like that was a particularly great robot. that they drew. It was, I don't know, it just felt a little too dumbed down in detail. For this book, like the spider characters are like pretty intricately detailed, but then when they scale out to the robot, it just looked like it was something that they couldn't spend a ton of time on, and it kind of looked, I don't know, a little bit like a GoBot from the 80s. And if everybody remembers the GoBots, they were like the cheap version of the Transformers. But everything else in this book is really sharp. There's particularly in the scenes where they are kind of dimension hopping across the multiverse. There's a really great page here with the Spider-Man of India from Earth 50,101. What I really like here is how Barbarian Nauk really it's clear that they're having fun drawing all of the different spider people. You have a Spider-Man who's an older version of Peter Parker, who eventually married Mary Jane Watson, and then Mary Jane became his partner, so she also gained superpowers at some point. I really love this costume of the Spider-Man of India, with kind of the long flowing, and I'm sure that there's a proper name for Indian garb, which I don't know, but he's got the long flowing, like he's got like the baggy pants and like the long flowing shirt that comes all the way down, and kind of the Buccaneer boots, or at least the I don't know what you call those. They're not Buccaneer boots, but they're some kind of boots. Again, I prefer the Miles Morales render in here, and the blacks on Miles. I love how the black of Miles's costume is a deeper, darker black than a lot of the other characters that he's on screen with, which I feel like is appropriate. Like, there should be something that breaks out Miles Morales and makes him special. You get Ben Reilly come back after his recent psychotic jaunt as the Jackal. There's a bit of a disturbance in the force between he and Otto, who is now back in the spectacular Superior Spider-Man suit. And again, I didn't care for him shifting costumes from the octopus suit, because I really love the new octopus suit. But like I said, Barbarian Nauk do a great job drawing a lot of these costumes, and you could almost just, this is a book that you could almost just flip through and not even bother reading the story. But in the story, the good spiders and the bad spiders, the faction that have rallied around Miles and the faction that's rallied around Otto, finish all their recruiting and gather their teams, and then the good spiders decide that they're going to go ahead and launch an assault on the Inheritors and try and blow the lab of Otto's that they've taken over, where the cloning vats are and where they have created a shell for their father. And so Miles wants his team to go in and take that down before that team, or before the father can be resurrected. And the battle is going badly, and Otto shows up with his team. There's a great little sequence where Miles calls Otto and offers him the opportunity to partner with them again on the assault. And Otto's like, well, it sounds like, we don't have a plan together. Plus you guys aren't really willing to kill them. And Miles is like, Roger that. I'll write you down as a no. So it's just a very leadership-oriented Miles in that phone call, more so than we normally see Miles. When you look at the Champions, and I think you're going to, I don't know, I know you read Champions. I don't know if
I did read Champions. It's on the honorable mentions.
Okay, so I don't know if we'll get into that in any detail, but my point, when you read Miles in Champions and you see him in team-ups with Miss Marvel, he's not people look to him for leadership, but he never leans forward with it. He kind of expresses like the spirit or feeling of the group, kind of in a Gian Giones kind of way, but he's not like a battlefield leader. And this I felt was much more him leaning into that role, and just like being super sarcastic with Otto and like cutting him off when Otto, like, it seemed like Otto was trying to like have a conversation with him, and like whenever Miles didn't hear, and I go through this a little bit in my own workday at work, whenever Miles thought he heard Otto saying just complete rubbish, he'd be like, okay, fine, whatever. I've asked you and we're moving on. So I really liked that scene played out between them. So this is a big fight. It's a big action comic too, a little more so maybe even the last one. And at the end, the spider teams are licking their wounds. I love the spider in this that is, it's a colony of spiders, who have somehow convinced themselves that they're Peter Parker.
That was pretty funny.
Yeah. And one of the spiders is, one of the spider people is a Harry Osborn from an Earth. And after this battle, Osborn and this collection of spiders starts conspiring against the group. I wasn't super crazy about that because I really just want a fight between the spider teams and the inheritors without a lot of infighting and betrayal. The book convinced me enough to give it a chance to let it see, how that would go. So there were a couple books last week especially that I felt like ended, and maybe even more so the week before that like were fine books but didn't stick the landing. I didn't quite label that criticism at this one. At the end of the day, I gave this book an 8.5, which is significantly higher than I gave issue number 2. I was actually really happy that I read this issue this week in my stack. I'm not necessarily committed to reading, the 4th issue when it comes out, but I definitely won't, if it does pop up in my randomizer, I'm not going to shove it away. So, I don't know, did you get a chance to read this, Steven?
Yeah, I did get to read it. I thought I didn't enjoy it as much. I'll give it a 7.5. It's just that I didn't like that Miles went to fight the inheritors without a plan, and it just seems immature of him as a hero that's been a hero for a while to just run in that like that. I thought Peter Parker taught him better than that, and I didn't like that aspect.
I felt like he did have a plan, and the plan just didn't work out that great. I mean, the plan he didn't have contingencies, so. There was one detonator. Maybe it would have been better to have like a detonator that was a decoy, and then have somebody else have the real detonator. Particularly after like they just made that error with like the whole Gwen Stacy thing last issue. So I don't know. But I could definitely see how somebody would see it that way though.
I do like how Otto Octavius is written from in this issue. He's pretty, I guess, full of himself. I actually enjoy that.
Well, and let me ask you too, like, this feels a little bit like a movie in that, like, the breakout character is, I'm trying to go back and remember her name, is the female Otto Octavius from the other Earth, who I know.
Oh, yeah.
I know
Octavia?
I know they mentioned her in here. Yeah.
She was in the previous Spider-Verse.
Yeah,
she wasn't that prominent as in this one.
Yeah, Octavia Otto, heroic other dimensional counterpart to Otto Octavius. Yeah, and that's part of the problem is there's some neat nods to just different variants. I love like the Ben Reilly Peter Parker duo where like Uncle Ben lived and he was a big brawler, kind of like a wildcat, but then a young Peter Parker became his partner. And then I really love the web slinger Ponderosa Parker of Earth 31913, who has like 2 pistols and he's like a cowboy. So there's some really neat creative asides here, and unfortunately they can't like showcase all of them. But at any rate, it's clearly I enjoyed the issue. So
okay.
So the last issue in our review segment is Sideways Annual number 1. Now this is one that I wound up pulling because every week what I do is I look at Steven's pull list and I add another 2 from what he's reading to my pull list. This was one of those. Sideways Annual number 1. Actually, Spider-Geddon was the other one. Sideways Annual number 1, subtitle Just Rifting Here, published by DC. The credit thing on this one was really weird, where they just called Will Conrad, Cliff Richards, Dan DiDio, and Grant Morrison the storytellers. And I'm not familiar with this creative team, so I didn't really, I believe Will Conrad is the actual writer. And I know Dan DiDio, kind of in a, like, Dan Slott, Joss Whedon role on some other comics where, like, they're the architects and they have the master concept, and then they hand the writing duties off to other people. I guess Cliff Richards did all the art, I guess. I don't know. But the situation here is that I know you've been reading this.
Yeah.
So forgive how I wrote this up, because I wrote this up as a drop-in issue. So the situation, who knows? This book is pretty darn crazy. It's not in my regular recurring pull list. This was a drop-in partially driven by yours, as I mentioned. As far as I can tell, there are some multiverse variants of Citizens of Metropolis, a couple of Clarks, a couple Loises, maybe some others who at some point got turned into monsters. They travel around to other Earths, probably wreaking a bit of havoc, but maybe they are not inherently evil. They're partnered or opposed, I guess, by a frenemy, by a guy named Derek, who got his powers, and while they are apart, they're somehow part of a greater whole, because there's this whole reference to them as the Warrior 7 or whatever. In this annual, some element of this story culminates in a climax, and as the Warrior 7 are present for the realization of some prophecy, the question then being how many of them are going to survive and what's the status quo after the fact. Oh, and my favorite thing is, we get T-shirt and jeans Superman in this.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Pretty awesome. I don't remember which one he is again, though, from what Earth or whatever. But I really took a fancy to this story. It's pretty busy. I mean, super busy. And it stands out in stark contrast to last week's Justice League Wonder Woman, The Witching Hour #1, for instance, which I felt was kind of slow and didn't have any action in it at all. There's something going on literally all the time, and Conrad gives you a panel, maybe two, to reorient yourself to the current state of the is before he ramps the pace back up. So the main device here is Sideways, the main character. His main power is this rift jump that allows him to pull kind of a mixture between a Kitty Pryde and Iliad or Rasputin, where he phase jumps and leaps through time-space to appear somewhere else. So this is characterized in the book where, from one sequence in the book, he pops in, a bunch of stuff happens, and then he pops out. So the camera is constantly being pulled, like, from one scene to another, in a pretty snappy kind of manner. It looks like he might be able to do this to displace objects as well, kind of like the portal-making character in Incredibles 2 could do. Conrad uses this to great effect as he's constantly resetting the scene. It could easily become unwieldy in the hands of another writer, but he and the rest of the creative team keep it just in check. It creates a remarkable sense of pace in a good way, and after having read some really slow reads recently, as I mentioned, this was a pleasant change in dynamic. Particularly for these larger issues, I think the main thing that I was kind of latching on to when I wrote these talking points is that a lot of the larger books, like I've had a few like double-sized and quadruple-sized issues in my pulls for the last few months, and it seems like anything that was oversized was incredibly slow in a lot of cases. Not every time, but frequently. So in art, there's some really great creature work in this book, and again, I point back to some books that we talked about last week where we had artists writing a storyline and that they had to do creature work and that wasn't their normal shtick and it didn't work as well. It did here. Solid fight choreography as well, beautiful specular lighting with a lot of the weird funky dimensional transition effects in the background. An excellent hand, the artist had an excellent hand in making some of the big battle scenes, with a good amount of detail, but not quite overdoing it. Most of all, there are just some great poster-worthy T-shirt and jeans Superman poses and splash pages in this. Like, every few pages, there's just like a great Superman pose of jeans and T-shirt Superman. We don't get to see that Superman this often, and the art team really sinks their teeth into it. Good work also on clothing in terms of making the jeans rumple. This Superman's hair is a bit looser. Apparently extra-dimensional Superman does not use as much hair product as our Clark Kent does. So it's a big damn adventure book, and the art syncs up with that motif pretty darn well. There's some funkiness in some of the Clark close-ups where there's a bit of inconsistency from portrait to portrait across gaps that are several pages, meaning you see Clark on one page and they do a close-up and he looks one way, and then 5 to 7 pages later there's a close-up on his face again and he looks slightly different. In one case he looks like he's Asian or like mixed ethnicity. So it's not entirely jarring, but it did take me out of the read a bit because I would be like, whoa, wait, why does he look so different there? At the end of the day, I scored this book a 7.5 out of 10, which is on my grading scale. That is a book that is really good, but falls maybe just short of greatness, and maybe that's just because it didn't have a big reveal or a major, like, breakneck snap of a new status quo. But at the end of the day, I was really pleased that I dropped in to take a peek at this. DC has something really nice going on with these just outside the inner circle new creations of the DC universe, and I'm talking about Sideways, The Silencer, and Immortal Men. All these things that came out of Dark Knight Metal. I'm also surprised that I'm saying this, but I actually hope that we get to see a crossover event with all of these characters that, as far as I can tell, like I said, came out of Metal. While this issue slides just shy of greatness, it was a really pleasant read and a nice way to get my stack started for this week, because this was the first book that I read. I'm hoping that it comes up in the randomizer at some other point so I can do another drop-in. Again, no room in my recurring list to put this on, although I'm officially pulling the trigger on replacing Batwoman this week, because I don't know what the heck is going on with it, but I just know it hasn't shown since the last issue that I read like 3 months ago.
That series got canceled. It ended a long time ago. Batwoman?
Yeah, no, not a long time ago. It just, issue 34 was just like this August or something.
You said Batwoman, right?
Yeah.
All right.
But
right? Yeah.
No. It was, it was 34 was just, like I said, was just a couple months ago. I keep looking for the rest of it, and it didn't. The way the last few pages were written, I could definitely see how it went on hiatus, but the story didn't end. It ended with her moving in, or maybe prepping to get married to I can't remember what they're doing to Maggie Sawyer in the comic.
You talking about that Batwoman series?
Yes, yeah. So overall pretty good. I thank you for picking it being in your pull list last week, so I wound up pulling it onto mine. And actually, this was a slightly different trend. Just because we have different opinions, sometimes I pick things from your list that don't sit as well with me as some other things. This is a week where the two books that I picked from your list were actually two of the most enjoyable things that I read. So,
I do have a few things to say about.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I did enjoy this a lot. I could give it an 8.0, but this is that. I'm glad to see the New 52 Superman back, because that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be the New 52 Superman. I wish they explained it.
Oh wait. So is this the Superman who took off at the end of Convergence and was replaced by married parent Superman that we have now in Rebirth?
Yes, it is.
Okay, all right. Oh wow, okay.
They just didn't explain how he exists, because he's supposed to be merged with Superman because I remember the story he had with the Mxyzptlk. I always get in trouble saying his name.
Okay.
But yeah, he merged the two Supermans into one character.
Huh, that's interesting.
And he's supposed to have a mixture of both Superman. Both the pre-52 Superman and the new 52 Superman.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember, I forgot the previous writer who wrote the book already. Dan Jurgens didn't do a good job of merging the two characters.
Okay.
I didn't like the origin, and I was kind of missing the new 52 Superman, because I did like him. I did enjoy him. I know a lot of people don't like him, but I did enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I was glad to see him back into the universe, and I did see that he is still a irresponsible Superman.
Right. He's the one who's not that experienced and kind of runs in like a knucklehead. Although,
that is the point, because he's only been a hero for like a
year or whatever, right? No, but you know what? I'm actually glad I didn't know that. I'm glad that I know it now. I'm glad I didn't, because I would have been much more prone to give the book a nod. Again, 7.5 is not an 8.0 or above for me. However, for a book that I did a drop-in issue on that is not part of like the DC legacy, that I'm, it doesn't get any, bonus points for like being a character that I love that I don't get to see a lot. It's a completely new IP. So I feel like the issue kind of earned it a little bit more than it would have if I had known that was like, because I don't read a lot of Superman. I probably read more New 52 Superman, at least via Action Comics. I didn't read the main Superman book, but I read a lot of the Action Comics that Greg Pak did, and really.
I really liked when Greg Pak was writing Action Comics.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I would have definitely been inclined to maybe boost. Again, not deliberately, but probably subconsciously, I probably would have given it the 8.0. Just for, that Superman being in there. But I actually like, for my own reading experience, that I felt like the book earned it more so just for being the Sideways annual, rather than for capitalizing on a hook from New 52, so.
Yeah, I just hope we see him again, because I didn't like that they just, like, he stays in the dark multiverse world, and they didn't just explain how he exists if he's supposed to be merged with the Superman that's in the main Earth right now.
Yeah, I mean, I do too. I mean, I guess
he's a plot hole.
Well, right, and the problem with the Rebirth Superman is it's kind of always a nagging like mosquito buzzing in the back of my head that's like, okay, but that's not really the Earth 1 Superman. Like, that's not really my Superman. Although that character is working out okay, but. At the end of the day, this is my whole thing that like bends me out of shape and will drive me to a rant, which we won't do this show, about the whole like mismanagement of DC and the notion of the multiverse going all the way back to like 1984 when I first started in comics, when we did Crisis on Infinite Earths and cleaned all this up, right? And then
made more of a mess. It's getting cleaned up.
I know. Well, and Convergence, right? We did Crisis. We slipped away from the solution of Crisis. Convergence was supposed to solve everything that you had ruined, right? And then it just went right back to the same thing. Like, yeah. So, like I said, I'm not going to do the rant, but the whole that makes me angry. Immortal Hulk number 8. Let's talk about something that doesn't make me angry. Although the titular character of this comic is a very angry individual. Great book. I'm actually kind of a little disappointed that Al Ewing didn't respond to my shout out that he gave him on Twitter late last night, or Alex Ross for that matter, but I digress. They don't owe us anything. This is what I talk about. This is what I mean when I talk about a book that you're on. And like for months I've been telling people Immortal Hulk is good, Immortal Hulk is good. I think largely comic book readers are sleeping on this. And yet again, Hulk is kind of a bit like Superman. Like, he's so powerful that he's tough to make interesting stories for. I feel like Al Ewing and Joe Bennett have been doing that. And again, there's been like a few cantilevers, where they haven't quite nailed an issue perfectly. But this is a book that for me has been steadily getting 7.5s. Which is fine. I mean, Justice League has been doing the same thing. Issue number 8 just to me skyrocketed and really brought together like the complete formula of like why you would be reading this. And so it's taken 8 issues to get there. But man, it's a solid issue number 8 in my opinion. And one of the problems has been that when they started telling this story, it seemed a bit outside of the Marvel Universe. And for a while, I think I kind of wanted that. Like I said, I don't really know how you tell like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of horror-ish kind of story if it's steeped in the Marvel Universe. But I feel like they're winding around and finding that really elegant balance between telling that horror story. And I mean, and they're still going with the thing of like the Hulk comes out at night, right? Which is a kind of a weird, again, werewolf Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing, but they're working it, right? It's working. But like I said, in this issue, I feel like it all came together. It's a completely, I mean, it's a, like, I don't like watching medical shows, right? Like the reality, like medical TV shows where they show actual surgery and you see like bone and blood. And I'm like, I can only look at that for about 10 seconds and then I'm out, right? Again, it doesn't scare me. It's just unpleasant and like awkward, and like I don't like watching it. This was that. Like I'm looking at the page and there's really gross things happening, and I'm like, this is making me very uncomfortable. I don't like looking at this page. But of course, with comics, I feel like when you look at a page and it makes you uncomfortable, the creator's doing something right. So in this issue, there's this doctor, I think it's Dr. Clifton, whose head, or at least he's the science head of this shadow base, that a general who's been the protege of, I think, Thunderbolt Ross. I think they may have mentioned another general, or maybe it's Thaddeus Ross now. And I don't know if that's the same character, they're just referring to him by a slightly different name, or if it's the son, I don't know. But another general who we were introduced to a few issues ago is the commanding officer of this base. This guy, Dr. Clifton, is the scientific head. We get to meet some more of the science team, who are conducting experiments on the Hulk. Now that they've dissected him, there's this whole reference to like a drill, and a saw that are made of special materials, and there's only like 4 of them in the world. Cost millions of dollars. That's how they dissected the Hulk. And they have him all separated into jars. So they're running tests on him whenever they bring, there's a scene where they bring the heart back and they sawed the heart in half while it was away from the other body parts, but then once they bring it back and it's within the vicinity of the other body parts, it starts to heal. Dr. Clifton picks it up and just holds the 2 halves next to each other, and they start repairing, and they make this gross kind of sound in the thing, sound effect written. So it's a really gross thing. Probably the grossest thing. I'm sorry, I gotta get a cup of coffee here. My mouth is drying out, throat's drying out. Sorry, it's been a very long day. The really gross thing is, well, so the whole point of this is, again, this is very intelligent Hulk, kind of in the way, if you ever watched the TV show Angel, they used to talk about how Angelus, the evil persona of Angel, was smarter than Angel, who was seeking redemption, because evil's smart and good is stupid, and it's kind of the same way here. This is a very macabre and therefore very cunning Hulk. And Dr. Clifton realizes too late, Hulk is actually happy that he's been captured and in this base, and that they're dissecting him, because he's learning things about his capabilities while they're testing him that he didn't know. And so they have him separated into a jar. He realizes through them talking around him about their findings that he can control his body parts in other jars. And so he starts tapping with one of the hands, and he's able to tap it hard enough to knock that glass jar over, knock all the other glass jars over, and then his body starts to re-merge. Well, Dr. Clifton is in the middle of the body, and just very grotesquely and very gruesomely gets murdered by being consumed within the Hulk's body mass. Then there's another scene where there's a transformation scene, which I don't think we've seen so far in this run on Hulk. But how he transforms back to Banner is, again, very straight out of The Howling. It's a very grotesque, body contortion kind of this is not the Mark Ruffalo I fade from green to white kind of thing that we see in the Avengers. It is again much more so the really gross American Werewolf in London kind of renditions of the transformation. So great comic, great art. Joe Bennett, I've been impressed, but I felt like there was something missing. But he smacked the veneer of perfection on this issue, in my opinion. I rated this issue 9.0 out of 10. And again, I was very pleased with it. Again, I've been on it from the beginning. So to me, this was kind of the march to the payoff issue. So that was the best thing that I read this week. Steven, what was the best thing you read this week?
The best thing I read this week was The Walking Dead, number 185. It was written by Robert Kirkman, and the artist is Charlie Adler. Yeah, I really did enjoy this issue a lot, and it's the issues about, you see, it starts off with Dwight and Rick talking about what they're gonna do, what they're gonna do now that they're in this Commonwealth, the hilltop kind of place, like the new area they visited, and Dwight he wants Rick to take over this place, but Rick said that he doesn't want to take over. He's tired of having wars and fights with people, and he said he likes the people here and he doesn't want to start fighting with them. But Dwight thinks that is great. It's good that if we take over this place because he thinks that the people are actually scared of their leader, and he thinks that they will actually join Rick's people and fight against the leaders of this town. And this issue does get very political, and I think that's a bit interesting. But yeah, it's just this is another interesting thing I did notice is that there's a scene where Rick is talking with Michonne and her daughter. They're in a restaurant, and they were kind of in awe because they didn't think that there would be a place where there's a restaurant ever again. And Rick does end up tearing because he said he wished Andrea was there to be able to see this type of place. And it was kind of sad for him not to for her to be there at that moment.
So there's obviously a thing, for people who, now there are people who read the comic, there are people who watch the show. There's a small number of people who do both.
Yeah.
I don't read the comic. I have watched the show up until like last season, or maybe halfway through last season. And obviously there's a thing where there are storylines which are analogs of each other between the two, but aren't quite the same. So is this storyline like a mixture for somebody who watches the show or has watched the show but doesn't read the comics? It sounds like this is kind of a mixture of the show storyline between the mayor and Alexandria, where the town with the mayor was a place where maybe some people would have been interested in seeing Rick take over, but on the show it's Alexandria where there was a notion of Rick taking over, and people factionalized around whether he should or shouldn't. Is that kind of what's going on in the comic now?
Is this I'm not sure what you're explaining, but
okay, all right.
The book is like I think it's way ahead of what the TV show is at, because I am watching the TV show. I saw a recent episode, the one with Rick. I actually saw that one too. So
yeah, like on the show they have Hilltop. Hilltop has been around for 3 or 4 seasons, but is sorry for spoilers for people who weren't expecting The Walking Dead, the TV show, to be spoiled. But, yeah, it appeared, I want to say 3 or 4 seasons ago, and it has been a town that they've been, allies with. But at least 2 seasons ago, it had a guy who was in charge of it who was really kind of a wet paper towel. And I think, I can't remember Lauren Cohen's character, was eventually kind of voted in to replace him, because he was too weak. So that's why and this is what the show does is it takes storylines from the comic and riffs on them, right? It's a thing happens to a character on the show that happened to a different character in the comic, right? But it's the same event, but a different character. So I don't know. But
yeah, but I think because I know the place is called the Commonwealth. I don't know why in the summary I have here it says Hilltop. It got me confused, but
no.
Yeah, I noticed. I think the summary's kind of wrong or something.
Well, so I haven't watched the show, but I guess what I was expecting to happen what I would have expected to happen would have been because they talked about this nascently, but it hadn't culminated. Was I would have expected like. The Commonwealth sounds like what would have happened. Like, Alexandria would have been allied with hilltop and would have been allied with I forget the place that the kingdom, which is
Ezekiel, yeah,
which is what Ezekiel was in charge, right? It seems like the three of them would have banded together and become a commonwealth where they each would have had their individual leaders, but they would have been in an alliance.
Yeah, they just ran into this new town, and it's called a Commonwealth, and they have a new it's a woman that is in charge of this area, and they notice that the place is kind of peaceful in a way.
Yeah.
But they also find out the reason why it's peaceful is because there's police in every section. It's kind of like it's a police state town.
Right,
and
right.
You see that in the book, that there's people that are not comfortable with that, and Rick is still blinded to it. He doesn't know if he doesn't feel uncomfortable yet. I guess he's just more amazed about how peaceful it is, and he always wanted a place like this.
Right.
And for some reason he's not seeing what Dwight is seeing, and then I think it's pretty interesting. And I noticed that this story arc does show how political Walking Dead can get.
Yeah. Yep.
And I don't know, because I heard George Romero didn't like The Walking Dead because to him it's not political, and I disagree. It is political. It has very strong influences of George Romero. And I don't know. This issue actually proves how political it can get.
Yeah, I mean, I watch the show. I don't so much read the comic, but it seems like pretty quickly on the show, after like the third or fourth season, like the threat stopped being the walkers, right? The threat started being the other humans, and as you get exposed to each of these new townships with their different forms of leadership, it's all a treatise on different political systems that are semi-democratic, and it's actually kind of if the Foundation trilogy, by Asimov is a treatise on the Roman Empire, then this is definitely a treatise on the regression of the political systems which have come into being in the modern age. It's we all know the history of how those political systems built up. I mean, The Walking Dead, the TV show, is a lot about how those political systems regress and kind of reset. In times where there's not as an effective a means of like the notions of common security and common economic partnerships. But we're getting deep into some other stuffs, but let's go ahead and round out tonight's discussion. We're not even rounding out. Let's quickly run down what you had for honorable mentions for this week, Steven.
Oh, and I gave The Walking Dead a 10. I forgot to mention this.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Okay, so my honorable mentions is The Curse of Brimstone number 8, Champions number 26, Doctor Strange number 7, Iron Fist number 2, and X-Men Red number 10.
Okay, and again, the honorable mention sections are any comics that we haven't discussed in the review section or in the best thing that we read this week that we also gave or would have given an 8.0 score or above on our 10-point scale that goes in half-point increments. So for me, outside of the things I already talked about, I also gave 8.0s or above to Justice League number 11, Spider-Geddon number 3, and Batman number 58. I'm sorry, so it's anything outside of the best thing that we read this week that we gave 8.0s or above to. And then lastly, let's run through our pull lists for the upcoming week. I'm going to be pulling Fantastic Four number 3. And all of these, except for the last two, are things that are currently on my recurring pull list. Fantastic Four number 3. Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man number 312, which is the second issue with the new creative team after the departure of Chip Zdarsky. Titans number 29, which will be my first time pulling that series since adding it to my recurring pull list. Miss Marvel number 36, which will start a new arc after wrapping up the previous arc with the Shocker. Red Hood Outlaw number 28, which also starts a new arc after Red Hood repositioned to a new town that I just refer to as Pleasantville, where something sinister is apparently awry underneath the surface. And things that I'm going to pull from Steven's list, I will also pull Plastic Man number 6 and Star Wars Dr. Aphra number 26. So, Steven, what are you going to be pulling next week?
I'm going to be pulling number 6 and Mr. Miracle number 12, which are both final issues of their series. I'm also picking up Titans number 29, Uncanny X-Men number 1, and Star Wars Dr. Aphra number 26.
So let me just ask you before we close out. So Uncanny X-Men number 1, so has Extermination ended, or is it ending like next?
No,
is Uncanny X-Men the reset?
It's supposed to be the reset. Yeah, you're right. But the fifth, it's supposed Extermination, the final issue is number 5, which hasn't come out yet.
Okay. And is that just a publishing thing? It seems like the plan probably was that Extermination number 5 probably would have come out already.
I think it was just Uncanny X-Men number 1 got published before.
Okay.
I guess Extermination number 5 just supposed to be coming out.
Okay. Well, very cool, man. As always, a great conversation. This, I don't know about you or the listeners or this conversation every week always invigorates me and makes me love comics, and makes me love reading comics. It is a nice way to wrap up my thoughts about the comics that I just read, and firmly sets me up and makes me hungry to read what's coming up in my pull list on Wednesday. So, Steven, any other comments that you want to make before we get out of here?
Thanks. I appreciate hearing that, what you just said.
Oh, yeah, no problem at all, man. Like, dude, this is a show I have been trying to put together for probably 4 years, and just never found the partner with the right chemistry and the right depth of readership. That's part of the problem. I've run across people who like only read DC or only read Marvel, and they only want to do a podcast about those. Or
I agree. I have the same problem.
Yeah. Or they only read superhero comics and they don't read like crime comics or war story comics, or they don't read anything outside the mainstream. So it's just always, So thank you very much. I appreciate it. You came along at the right time in my geek life. So.
All right. You're welcome.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for joining in for this episode, episode number 6 of the What's Your Issue Weekly People's Comic Book Podcast. Not recanting. I always want to say recanting. Reviewing all the comics that we read that shipped the comic book shipping week of the 7th of November. In 2 days, like the rest of you, we will be picking up our pull list of things that shipped the 14th of November, and we'll be right back here next Monday to talk about them again. So, on behalf of myself, my co-host Stephen Laura, the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube, Gearworks.com, and the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, thanks so much for joining in. Please head over to all those channels and sites. Steven, what's your plug? Ultimate Awesomeness?
Yeah, Ultimate Awesomeness. Yeah, that's the name of the YouTube channel, Ultimate Awesomeness.
Okay, so please head over to all those other content locations and consume all that other stuff. We do appreciate it. If you want to get in touch with us, the best way to get in touch with us to give us feedback on this podcast, ask us questions, maybe give us input on something you want us to read in the upcoming shipping week. Probably the best thing to do is contact us on Twitter at E2KG Network. Thanks so much for joining in, everybody. That's going to do it for us for tonight. We're out of here.